Nothing in this podcast or on our website should be construed as medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for your individual nutritional and medical needs. The information presented is based on our research and is strictly that of the author and not necessarily those of any professional group or other individual.
Hi, I'm Sue Becker from Bread Beckers. Welcome to Sue's Healthy Minutes. I'm so excited you've joined me today, and I hope this episode encourages you and allows you to find the answers you have been praying for the health of you and your family. I recently had the wonderful privilege of connecting with a new friend, Chelsea Blackbird. Like me, Chelsea has a passion for sharing her knowledge of healthy eating with others through her teaching. God pushed her out of the nest, so to speak, as she became the Christian Nutritionist. But like so many others over the years, Chelsea began to question the current anti-bread and anti-grain teachings that certainly contradict God's word. Jesus compared himself to bread, so how could it be bad? After 10 years of being gluten-free, Chelsea was introduced to Bread Beckers and began to listen to some of my teachings. Her aha moment turned into a radical change. She began to introduce real bread made from freshly ground flour into her diet and to understand the unique health benefits of real whole grains. She reached out to me and invited me to be a guest on her podcast. We had a lovely time sharing, and she really let me run with it. I shared so much information that she turned it into 2 parts. Today, I am happy to share part 1 with you all. Some of the information you may, of course, have heard before, but I think it's always worth hearing again. However, with so much information in my head, you never know what new nuggets might pop up in any given presentation. You'll also hear some of Chelsea's story. So please enjoy part 1 of the benefits of eating real wheat with Chelsea Blackbird and me. You might also want to check out Chelsea's website, The Christian Nutritionist.
Today's topic might surprise or even shock you, considering I've been gluten-free for over 10 years and recommending a gluten-free lifestyle, especially to those struggling with any kind of health concern. But I have to tell you, I feel like it's confession hour here. I've been experimenting with milling organic wheat, like I bought a machine that grinds wheat, and I have been making bread, and we've been eating it. And you'll be glad to know I haven't died and I haven't experienced any overt, noticeable issues, no digestive issues, no energy issues, no skin issues. Those are kind of the first levers that usually get flipped for me. But so far, so good. I do plan to do a little bit of lab testing just to see. I like to experiment with that kind of thing and see if that shows anything. But I want to be clear before we move into this. It doesn't mean I'm eating conventional gluten-y products like bread and crackers from the grocery store. It's only this organic wheat that I'm using at home. I'm sure you're wondering what in the world possessed me to do such a thing after having such a definitive stance over it all of these years. So I'm going to tell you what led me here. Much of it is due to the influence of our guest today. I will introduce her in just a minute. But I want to just kind of give you insight into my thought process here. I've had, some cognitive dissonance over the years when it comes to eating wheat. We know that it was a major staple of the biblical diet. We know Jesus as the bread of life. I always joke that anytime we see Jesus in a food scene in the Bible, it usually involves fish, bread, and often wine. And I'm like, I'm so down with that. I would love to dine with Jesus and those foods. But the problem, as we've heard it, is that modern wheat is not the same as biblical wheat. We're going to talk a lot about this today, but in a nutshell, a lot of the concern has been pinned on the fact that when wheat was hybridized in order to make it a smaller, sturdier, higher yielding plant, this changed the structure in a way that made the gluten proteins more pronounced and problematic, if you will. And that is why we've seen such an increase in celiac disease and also gluten sensitivity in the last 50 to 70 years. We have celiac disease on my mom's side of the family, which put this on my radar early on. And as I've shared here, going gluten-free made a tremendous impact on my health. And we see that for many people. I know a lot of people who, even if they don't have celiac disease, one bite of gluten sends their body into a tailspin. So I've definitely seen removing it to be helpful for people. I won't deny that anytime we remove processed food from our diet, it's going to be, better for our health. And I know that for me, having that line in the sand of not eating gluten has saved me from eating tons and tons of unhealthy processed food over the years. But now there are so many more gluten-free products on the market, and it's not like they're healthy or have any redeeming nutrition qualities. They're just as bad as processed wheat products minus the gluten. But, people think all they have to do is remove the gluten and then it's fine. I've tried to teach my clients that it's not healthier. It does remove the gluten, but that the other ingredients aren't great, and so if we're buying gluten-free bread, to be mindful of that and use it sparingly. Even the homemade gluten-free bread I've made and make over the years, is made with processed flour. That's not great for you. And, over the years, I've had people ask me about using ancient grains, like how about spelt, which has a lower gluten content, or einkorn. And that's where some of this cognitive dissonance has come in for me. Is it really better to eat processed gluten-free flour over a high-quality ancient grain? And does everybody have to be gluten-free? Why can people go to Europe and tolerate the wheat there? Is it glyphosate that's really the problem? All of these thoughts have been swirling in my head for some time. But in the holistic health space, going gluten-free is like baseline foundation, and you just don't hear much otherwise. But because I do look to the Bible as a compass, I guess I've had more unsettling in my spirit than some people would. And my biggest fear as a health professional is leading people wrong. I'm not saying gluten-free is wrong. I just feel like there's a bigger picture, that needs to be explored. And now that Carly and I are teaching other people to be Christian health practitioners, in the School of Christian Health and Nutrition, I feel an even greater sense of responsibility. And I feel like God just kind of amped up this unsettling in my spirit over it, in the last year. So that's why when one of my former clients sent me a message saying, I'd really like to get your opinion on this video. And she said, I've been milling my own grain for some time now. So, watch this and see what you think. And it was a video of today's guest explaining and demonstrating the benefits of baking bread with organic milled wheat. And because of this unsettling in my spirit that I'd had, that I feel like the Lord, put there and had kind of amped up of late, I was open to watching it, whereas I can't say that I always would have been. So I watched it and I heard this lady speak scripture, shoot down a lot of the things we've heard about wheat and share some incredible testimonies about the benefits of eating it. And this sent my brain into a complete tailspin. I was like, whoa, wow, okay. And I immediately wanted to buy a mill and start making wheat bread, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I always get real excited when there's something new to try, whether it's a kitchen contraption or a supplement or a biohacking device. But this was just so in opposition to what I'd been doing for so long. I could not bring myself to do it. But I also could not get it out of my brain. And I binged on so many more YouTube videos about it. And I think I needed that time to let my brain open up about it a bit. And I would ask, well, I can't really say ask God, because honestly, I don't think I wanted to go there. I don't think I wanted to hear his answer. But I kind of felt him there just observing my thoughts about it, letting me work through it. He was there. And then one day, randomly, I was talking to another mom here in Sonora. We were standing in someone's front yard, picking up our girls from a birthday party. And I knew this mom had been making some major health shifts in her family. She was working with a holistic doctor, actually Dr. Ben Edwards in his clinic, and I've had him on the podcast before. And they had done a gluten-free trial. But now she said she was milling her own wheat and baking her own bread. And I said, oh my gosh, is it because of Sue Becker? And she said, yes. And I thought, all right, God, I hear you. I'm supposed to explore this. So I immediately went home. I ordered a mill. I ordered spelt and einkorn and, wheat. And we have been experimenting with making this bread and other homemade baked goods. I knew I wanted to have Sue on the podcast. I wanted to play with the bread first, for a little bit. So it's been about 3 to 4 months now. And like I said, it's been good. I feel like it's really important to share this information to give you a fuller picture of the options, to offer another viewpoint and some really good evidence and testimony of how eating real wheat can be good for you. And with that, I am honored to introduce our guest. Welcome, Sue Becker, to the Christian Health Club podcast.
Thank you so much. It's so delightful to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for sharing your journey. And that was very inspiring. Yes.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. I was so I don't know. I wanted you to be able to come on so bad. And, it took a while for me to finally kind of reach out and then get through the channels to find you. But I did, and you were so gracious to say, yes, let's do it. And so there's so much I want to talk about today. Mostly, I just want to give you the floor and let you let her rip, because you know how to do that. You know how to do it so well. But why don't we just start by just kind of sharing your background and your journey and how you got here.
Yeah, that's quite a story in itself. So I graduated from high school a long time ago. 50 years to be exact. So, went off to the University of Georgia as a pre-med student because I loved the studying the human body. I loved physiology, biochemistry, everything about the body and how it worked. Got to the University of Georgia and realized I didn't want to be in school that long, and I didn't want that grueling a career after college. I knew I wanted to be a wife and a mother, and I certainly have accomplished that. I don't know if you read my bio. I have 9 children, and I have number 15 and number 16th grandchild on the way. So I knew that was where my heart was, but I still just loved the body and studying physiology, and I wanted to help people. And I ended up in pharmacy school, and one quarter there, I was like, this is not what I want to do. And through prayer and the guidance of the dean of pharmacy school, he led me to food science. So I changed my major to food science, and food science is a broad field, lots of chemistry, food processing, everything that needs to be done to our food to make it sit on the shelf forever and ever, but also food microbiology and food spoilage and food preventing food poisonings and things like that. So I concentrated more in food microbiology, and I worked as a food microbiologist for Kraft Foods for almost 5 years before I had my first child. Once I had my first child, then I came home as a full-time mom. But after graduating school, I often laugh and say I was a better student after college or in school than I ever was in school. I just still had an appetite for learning and studying, and I continued to read my microbiology books and my biochemistry books, and I studied the works of Adele Davis, who was a popular biochemist of the day, and just was fascinated with eating real food and wanting to feed my family healthy food. And so we did, and I tell everybody I grew up Southern, so I cooked. Nothing was prepackaged. We had real meat, real vegetables, real fruit at every meal, and except for our bread. Our bread, of course, I bought the best bread that I knew of in the store, the whole wheat bread, the brown stuff, and dabbled a little bit in making my own. I would buy whole wheat flour from the store because I knew that was healthier, but it was terrible. It was grainy and gritty and didn't make a soft bread or muffin, so I always had to put some white flour in it. And I did everything I could to make the bread better, but like I said, outside of the bread, we were eating very healthy. And so in 1991, though, I came across a publication entitled How to Greatly Reduce the Risk of Common Diseases. In that publication, the history of white flour was presented, the processing that grains go through to make it shelf stable. This information revolutionized my thinking. Also in that journal was a brief discussion of the common diseases that plague Americans and how it was directly related to our consumption of this processed white flour. I learned in that journal that whole grains are the most nutrient-dense food that God has given us. But to prevent spoilage, processing of it removes the healthy bran and germ that's full of all the vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, vitamin E, and of course the fiber, leaving us with white flour that totally shelf stable, won't spoil, but virtually devoid of all the vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Yes, it has protein and starch, but without the other nutritional components, it was causing diseases in Americans. And I learned that the steel rolling mill came on the scene in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Prior to the 1900s, most Americans had the capacity either to mill their own grain or they bought their flour freshly milled from local millers, and that most of the diseases that we see today started escalating after 1900 when the steel rolling mills and the white flour, for the first time in history, became food for everyone. Of course, everyone was delighted. It meant, hey, yay, no more milling my grain. Of course, at that time it was by hand or, like I said, at the local miller. And so this was believed to be a wonderful discovery. But in that journal, I learned that shortly after the milling process began, that 3 diseases became epidemic. Beriberi, which is a vitamin B1 deficiency that causes nervous disorders, became epidemic. Pellagra particularly plagued the southeastern United States, and it's a vitamin B3 deficiency, and it's a horrible disease with bowel disruptions, skin eruptions, mental insanity, and virtually death in the end. And then anemia became a real problem as well. And this just opened my eyes into what had happened to our bread. And it was not something that I remember learning in school. And so it changed my thinking. And I also learned that eventually they traced these diseases to the white flour, the new white flour that was on the market, and that with the removal of the bran and germ, we lost these nutrients, and that was what was causing the problem. Eventually, the government stepped in and said, you got to put the bran and germ back in because of these epidemic diseases. And the millers were like, nah, we can't do that. We're selling the bran and germ as cattle feed. So they didn't want to give up that lucrative market. So they continued on. And eventually the government stepped in again and said, okay, you got to fortify the flour. But for the fortification process, they put 3 B vitamins and iron back in the flour for the 35 to 40 nutrients that are lost by taking away the bran and germ, not to mention the fiber that's lost and all the phytonutrients and who knows how many other vitamins and nutritional value that, helps you assimilate everything that's there. So this was very eye-opening to me, much like what you're saying, my video did for you. This changed my thinking, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is real. And with my science background, my biochemistry background, and the love for physiology and the way the body works, because I always kind of came at things, if our body's not working, then we're missing a nutrient and in our food, or either we need to supplement or whatever. So that was kind of my jumping off place in my thinking. Well, I was like, okay, this is the missing link in our diet, and I'm going to do this. And in fact, that's this is 23. So 32 years ago this month, because my birthday is in February, my husband bought me a grain mill for my birthday, and I began to mill all of the flour and make all of the bread, muffins, cakes, pancakes, whatever, from freshly milled flour. And I was astonished at the change in our health. We were not sickly people, but definitely had some issues going on. By then I had 5 young children, went on to have number 6 and number 7 after we began milling our own grain. But it changed everything. The first day for me, I milled the flour, I made the bread. I pooped the next morning is what I tell people, Constipation was instantly gone for me. And that had been something I had struggled with all of our life. And of course, one of the main diseases that I had read in that journal, that America is the most constipated nation in the world, and it's directly related to the bread and the flour products that we're eating. And constipation is not just about not going every day. It leads to virtually
many other bowel and GI related issues. And then also for me, I began to notice right away that my energy levels went up. And with 5 young children that you're homeschooling, you got nursing babies, you notice when your energy is up and you're not like crashing at 1 and 2 in the afternoon. And then my dependence on antihistamines went completely away in the first month of milling my own grain and making the bread for our family. And at first I didn't understand it, but then the more I studied, I realized that my constipation was leaving toxins in my body that was causing my body then to respond by making mucus so you can get rid of those toxins other ways. I lived on antihistamines. I had to take them every night to sleep so that my sinus congestion wouldn't keep me from breathing, and this was gone. And that was 1991, and I can stand here today and tell you that I've not had an antihistamine or a decongestant of any kind in 32 years. That's amazing. Even if I get a cold or the flu or whatever, I don't get so much congestion that I need an antihistamine or a decongestant. My body knows how to just flush it out. So those were big things for me. I also noticed my sugar cravings greatly diminished. And we can talk about that a little more in a few minutes, but you know, when you're giving your body those good carbohydrates that your body needs for energy, you don't have those highs and lows and slumps of energy. You get a good steady release of those carbohydrates for your body to use for energy throughout the day. And so with that was my energy, but also I wasn't craving sugar. Like, oh, I need something to pick me up. My frequent headaches were gone. I didn't have migraines terribly often, but certainly had them, but always just seemed to have kind of a dull, nagging headache, just kind of all the time. And so that was me, and that was the first day and the first month for sure. Then I began to notice that my children's they just didn't seem to get every sickness that came around church or whatever. It didn't pass through our family. The snotty noses went away. My 2 youngest children, just babies, they never went through that, what I call the 18-month snotty nose age, where they just seem to be goopy all the time. But, you know, so I noticed these things, and one of my children's warts went away. And I know people may laugh, but warts are a virus. And if your body doesn't have what it needs to fight the viruses and protect yourself from viral invasion, then you're going to get them often, like colds and flus and things like that, or you're going to keep it with a virus that causes warts. So I studied all these things. And so anyway, this was all pretty much in the first month of changing our bread to only freshly milled flour. And I just introduced the bread to everything we were already eating. Like I said, I was Southern. We were eating food, real food, meat, fruits, vegetables. And now I was adding real bread, is what I call it, to our table. And the other thing that was so exciting was it was delicious. It wasn't healthy food that I had to tell my children, you're going to eat this. Now, I will clarify by saying when I first read the information about whole grains and freshly milled flour, I assumed that this flour would bake up like and taste like the whole wheat flour that I was buying in the store, which I knew made very gritty, grainy bread, very dense, heavy bread. Never would I've made a muffin out of 100% store-bought whole wheat flour. So you'll realize that if you've listened to me, you know, I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person. So this was like, white flour is not coming back in our house. And my attitude was, I don't care. We're going to eat this bread. If you have to choke it down, you're eating it. So I was quite amazed when every loaf of bread, every muffin, every pancake was light and fluffy. My children loved it. They never complained about it. In fact, they loved it. My little toddlers got to where when they wanted something to eat, they would just say, I want to roll with honey, you know, instead of I'm hungry or can I have something to eat? So this was very, very exciting for me. This was healthy food that was nutritious, but very delicious, and food that I did not have to coerce my children to eat and my family to eat. I do a lot of things for healthy eating. I do green drinks and all kinds of things that my children over the years would go, no, Mom, we're not doing that. They never turned down a muffin, a donut, a cinnamon roll, a piece of bread, or a sandwich with our freshly milled whole grain bread. So that was exciting to me. So I began to bake bread for other people. I took it to church, of course, because I'm not going to feed people white bread, The next thing I knew, by 1992, people were coming to me saying, hey, I noticed that I have more energy when I eat this bread, or I pooped today, my constipation's gone. They started saying how much better they felt with just the rolls or the bread that I would send home with them from church or whatever. And so the next thing I know, people started calling me and saying, hey, I think I want a grain mill and I want to start doing this so that I have muffins and pancakes and everything in the home all the time. Will you teach me how to make bread, and where can I get a grain mill? And so that's how it began. And it was funny in those days of making bread for other people. I did start doing that. And the kids and I had this little business of making the bread for others. And it was funny because here I was making all the bread for my large family. I mean, like I said, we had 6 children by that time, by 1992. And I was homeschooling and we were active in church. Our kids played sports. They took piano lessons. So we were busy. So here I was making 6 loaves of bread twice a week for our family, muffins, pancakes, everything, but then also trying to make bread for other people. And I literally was wearing myself out. So after several people had asked me would I teach them how to make bread and where could they get a grain mill, I never forget the day in 1992. It was the fall of 1992. I met my husband in the driveway when he drove up from work after I'd been making bread all day and really weary. And I just looked at him and I said, I don't think I'm supposed to make bread for the world. I think I'm supposed to teach the world how to make bread for themselves. And we sat there on the swing in our carport and we talked about it. And we just decided that that's what we thought I was supposed to do. And that was the beginning of what we called Bread Beckers. And we started in 1992. We incorporated in 1998 with a longtime friend because we outgrew our home. We outgrew our family just on the testimonies of others. In fact, that's what led me to the video that I produced, because as these people started learning how to make bread and making it for themselves, I was getting phone calls. And one before 8 o'clock in the morning was the most memorable one in the beginning. And her words, not mine, were, it's the bread. It's got to be the bread. That's the only thing I changed. And my cholesterol dropped 85 points in 1 month. And then she went on to say, I've been on medication, 3 or 4 doctors. Nothing changed until I started doing this bread. And I began to hear this over and over. But this fascinated me. So I pulled out my biochemistry books and I'm like, Lord, what is in this bread that would bring someone's cholesterol down 85 points in a month? And I learned that every nutrient is there to bring cholesterol down and to metabolize fats and oils, and that cholesterol is a good nutrient that our body needs for just about everything. And we need it to be able to be in a usable form. And so the nutrients that were in whole grains and freshly milled flour were there. And that's why we were seeing these results. And we've heard it over and over. And then as I studied, I started reading that cholesterol, heart disease, these were not issues until the white flour came on the scene. So that kind of brings you to where we are today. We love what we do. I'm passionate about what we do. Like I said, we incorporated with a longtime partner in 1998. We moved into our current facility where we are now. We have a warehouse store and studio kitchen where we teach our cooking classes. And then we have another warehouse now where we have become one of the largest grain packaging facilities in the southeastern United States, with co-ops all over the place. In fact, we have some in Texas. As a result of my interview with Dr. Ben Edwards, we have a co-op. It's now moved from Lubbock to Sundown, but we have one in Fort Worth, and we have requests for some in Abilene and Childress. So you can email support@breadbeckers.com and find out about that. But that kind of brings you to where we are today. And I'm just on a mission. My mission in the beginning was to explain to people the difference in the commercially processed white flour and freshly milled whole grains and the value of the bran and germ. I've been shocked in the 30 years of all the anti-grain stuff that comes around that I have to go and study. And questioned the Lord again, going, okay, what's the truth here? And I've been amazed at the attack on bread and whole grains, but what I've learned has been invaluable. And I'm passionate about teaching people the truth so that we don't shy away from the most nutrient dense food God has given us. So that's my story.
It's an amazing one.
Yeah.
I had to laugh earlier when you were saying, you thought it would be your children would fight you your family would fight you to eat it. And just literally yesterday, I made blueberry muffins with my milled flour, and my family accused me, like, where did you buy these?
Uh-huh.
They thought I'd bought them because they were so good and just different from, so many baked goods I've made over the years, with gluten-free flour and such. Like, these are so good. Buy these again, Mom. Like, I made these.
Yes.
These.
I mean, your kids and your family are going to have different likes and dislikes. I mean, some of mine like the blueberry muffins and some don't like blueberries because they don't like cooked fruit. But anyway, I've found the same thing, and I've actually cooked for youth retreats, and I made the wedding cakes for my girls' weddings, and people would come up and go, this is the best cake I've ever tasted. And it was all freshly milled flour. So it's exciting when, people that think they don't like whole wheat, which I understand that. It's kind of nasty, the stuff from the store. But this is so light and fluffy. And I've never had someone just say they didn't like my bread. It's just been an interesting journey. So I'm passionate for helping people learn. A lot of people feel a little overwhelmed. They go, oh, I'm so busy. How can I do this? You can do it. It's easy. Buy the tools you need to make it adaptable to your lifestyle. I love my mill, and I say to this day, it's the most valuable appliance in my home. So
it literally takes
minutes.
Less than a minute to mill the grain.
Yes.
It's with that machine.
Yeah.
And everybody, we will put links to all these things we're talking about in the show notes. It literally, it takes no time at all.
I know. I have to tell you this story. It's really funny because when I first started milling and I would take bread to church or whatever, people go, oh my gosh, or coffee cake or muffins or whatever. I want your recipe. Can I get your recipe? And I'm like, well, yeah, I can give you the recipe, but you understand that I mill my own flour to make this. And they go, there was always two questions. The first, they would go, you do what? And I would say, I mill my own flour. And the second question just humored me for the longest time until I figured out some things. They would go, where do you live? And I would just laugh. I would go, I live in a house. And when I started writing my book a few years ago and studied really even more of the evolving of grain mills, and learned about the big stone mills, that water wheels or animals powering them. I'm like, that's what they thought, that I lived where I had a barn and an ox and a big mill or water or something. And they never imagined that I had this tiny little mill that sits on my counter and is electric, and all I do is pour the grain in, and in less than 30 seconds I can have a pound of flour. So it was always funny to me that was the question of what they were envisioning in their mind, that I mill my own grain.
Well, let's go into a little more to why somebody couldn't just go to the store and buy organic whole wheat and make their bread out of that. You did start in on that, but that's the question I'm going to get. Okay, is it the same? Can I just go to the store and buy, organic whole wheat, and what is wrong with that as opposed to milling my own grain?
Yeah. Yep. I did get into a little more of the history of white flour because that's what introduced me to it. But what we have to understand, that when those steel rolling mills came on the scene in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it displaced all other milling methods. So it displaced the local millers, went out of business. Whereas before, communities were built up around the miller. In the Atlanta area, just within 10 miles of my house, we have all kinds of Rope Mill Road, Sewell Mill Road, Howell Mill Road. These are mill roads. These are places that used to have mills there. And they were dotted all throughout the country. And when these stone mills went out of business, virtually all commercially milled flour is milled on the steel rolling mill. The steel rolling mill steams the grain, crushes the grain, and then sifts all the bran and germ out. Has to remove the oil or the flour would oxidize. And then a product called nitrogen trichloride was used for more than 40 years to bleach the flour because the residual oils would turn the flour yellow. So we couldn't have that, right? So this product was taken off the market, but a chlorine derivative is still being used. Benzoyl peroxide is another product that flour is exposed to. And let me just reiterate that this is used, now your bleaching wouldn't be, but benzoyl peroxide, even whole grain flour or whole wheat flour is exposed to that. And let me back up a little bit. So the steel rolling mills separate the bran and germ, producing white flour. To make whole wheat flour, they add some of the bran and germ back in. It is not at all the same as milling your own. The oils are removed. That is why the whole wheat flour you buy from the store is going to be dry and gritty because the oils aren't there. Not to mention that shortly after milling, oxidation begins and nutrients begin to oxidize. As long as you leave that kernel of grain whole and intact, those nutrients are storable. But as soon as you mill it into flour, the nutrients begin to oxidize. And I've read differing reports on how fast the oxidation takes place, but I know the University of Oklahoma and some other cereal universities that have departments in cereal, they say that most of the oxidation takes place shortly after milling. So that much we do know. So this is one of the problems, is that the whole wheat flour you're buying from the store is not at all like freshly milling and is indeed exposed to some chemicals. Now, I guess if you're buying organic, perhaps not, but there's a fallacy that circulates among bakers that you can't get good gluten development with freshly milled flour, so it actually has to be held for 2 weeks or 30 days, even some, for oxidation to take place so you get better gluten development. And some reputable flour companies that do leave all the bran and germ in, they do believe that, and so it's held so that oxidation actually takes place. So outside of milling your own, I just don't see how you're going to get all the nutritional benefits from the whole grain and even buying, say, the best flour you can get out there. Now, you might find some independent millers that would mill it fresh and sell it fresh, but like I said, some independent ones, they hold their flour so that it actually oxidizes. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, it tells us, God tells Adam and Eve what he's given them for food. And he says, "Behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed and every tree which has fruit yielding seed." So there's two kinds of food God gave us. He gave us fruits and vegetables that have the seed inside. And then he gave us seeds, grains, beans, nuts. These are the seeds, and that's the food for us. So why did he give us these two kinds of foods? Well, fruits and vegetables, what happens to them over time when you store them? They rot, they spoil. Every day they're losing nutrients as a part of the ripening and spoilage process. So that's why he gave us seeds, because those nutrients are storable as long as you keep that seed whole and intact. So he gave us two kinds of food so we would always have food to eat, even in the off season or the current season. So grains are storable, left whole and intact, but once they're milled into flour, the nutrients begin to oxidize fairly rapidly. There's some differing of opinion of how fast and what all you lose, but certainly you begin to lose nutrients. Oxidation is a fact of life. We've all seen what happens to an apple when you cut it. It turns dark immediately. So there's some oxidation that takes place right away, and freezing and refrigerating doesn't stop that. In fact, bananas tend to get darker as soon as you start refrigerating them. So those are things we need to think about. Yeah, maybe that's the best option of buying organic whole grain flour if you don't have a mill, but it's not going to give you the results that you're looking for. And I'm concerned that it's going to make you think this is what whole wheat flour tastes like.
Yeah, and the oxidation process, that is why, when they take this stuff out, that's what makes it shelf stable, to take it out. That's why it can live on all these things can live on the shelf with, of course, all the additives and things they put in there that you could leave a, bread out and it won't go moldy for a long time. And, that a long time ago in my bread journey, I've never been against bread.
Right.
And I always tell people that, but, I always knew, like, I'm not going to go to the grocery store and buy Mrs. Baird's. I mean, that's just, so like the very first step, even before I went gluten-free, was to start buying my bread in the bakery. Because I'm like, okay, at least this is going to spoil. I know that's a good sign.
Yeah. And that's something, we have to think about. I read some people say, the healthy whole grain bread in the store is no better than the white bread. Well, I tend to kind of agree. There's really not a healthy whole grain bread that you buy in the regular grocery store. If it's made by a large commercial food company, I bought a loaf of healthy 100% whole grain bread, and I say healthy sarcastically, by a reputable maker. It was double wrapped, so it was 100% whole grain is what it said. And to be labeled that, it has to have whole grain as the first type of flour. Now, remember, whole grain is not necessarily what you and I think of whole grain. Some of the branded germ's been added back. But I want to tell you this. So I bought this loaf of bread to use as a visual aid to read the ingredient label to people to see what was actually in there. I bought this loaf of bread in 2018. It is still on my shelf. It has never spoiled. It has never molded. Do you know what year we're in right now? 2023. I had to buy this second loaf in 2018 because I was using it as a visual aid, because the first loaf that I bought, I had for 5 or 6 years. It never spoiled. It never molded. It actually began to disintegrate, turned into dust. I'm not kidding. And I'm like, okay, this is very, very interesting. Yeah. So that's the problem with commercially made flours and commercially made bread products. They're just not what you think they are.
No, and I'd love for you to go a little bit more into the actual, and you started with some of the B vitamins and stuff, but maybe go a little bit more into the nutrition that we get when the grain is intact and then we freshly mill it, the vitamin E and all of these things that are so missing today, and that we are missing out by just buying commercial bread. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, and interesting. Yeah. So whole grains are one of the most nutrient dense foods God has given us. I read in one of my books that of the 44 essential nutrients for life and to promote health, there's only 4 missing in wheat. And that's just wheat. Some of your other whole grains might provide those. So the 4 are vitamin A. Wheat is deficient in vitamin A. Vitamin C. So eat your fruits and vegetables to get your vitamin A, your vitamin C. Vitamin B12, little deficient, but not completely. Vitamin D, go out in the sunshine without sunscreen, get some good sun, not extensive, not, overly exposed. But anyway, those are your 3 vitamins. And then an amino acid, lysine. Lysine is slightly deficient in wheat. It's okay for adults, but growing children need a little bit more. But if you add beans have lysine, and so that completes the protein components that you need. That's wheat. So what is in wheat? All your B vitamins. In grains. In general, they'll different nutritional profiles for specific ones, but overall, all your B vitamins are there. Your B1, B2, B3, and we already talked about, vitamin B1, nervous disorders, a deficiency in nervous disorders. Vitamin B3, pellagra, that was skin eruptions, mental insanity. One nutritionist that I studied, Dr. Abram Hoffer, he wrote a book, and he actually treated schizophrenics with vitamin B3, which B3 is niacin, which we may know it as needed for good heart function. All your minerals, zinc, iron, calcium, magnesium, they're all there. They're all in grains and in wheat. And then, of course, probably the one nutrient we're missing the most when we process grain and strip out the germ is essential fatty acids, but then its valuable component, vitamin E. Prior to bread flour being milled and the stripping away of the bran and germ, heart disease was rarely an issue. because of the vitamin E that we were eating on a regular basis. And Dr. Wilfred Shute, world-renowned cardiologist, he traveled all over, said, I found the cure for heart disease. He treated his patients with vitamin E, and he attributed the lack of vitamin E coming from when bread flour started being fractionated. He called it stripping away of the bran and germ. We lost the most potent anticoagulant, vitamin E. Vitamin E is needed by every cell in your body. I have a whole podcast and paper on vitamin E and grains. Wheat is one of the richest food sources of vitamin E that we have. So those are some of the main nutrients that we need to look at that we're now missing when we don't have the bran and germ components. When they strip away the bran and germ, we lose about 86% of the nutrients that are found in the whole grain. And that's not mentioning the fiber. We lose our richest, most delicious food source of fiber. Yes, we can get fiber from fruits and vegetables. That's mostly soluble fiber, but it's that insoluble fiber of whole grains and beans that's so critical for cleaning and out our guts and keeping our guts and our elimination system moving and healthy. So I'm probably forgetting something, but those are some of the main things that we need to look at. And when they strip the bran and germ away and we lost all these nutrients, like I said before, they only added 4 back, 3 B vitamins and iron and folic acid, because they watched the rising incidence of birth defects for more than 50 years and went, we've lost our folic acid source, so they now put folic acid, the natural is folate, and some people can't assimilate that. And so, yeah, supposedly it corrected all these issues that they saw epidemic proportions of when the white flour came on the market. But I always ask this question, how many nervous disorders do we have today? How many skin issues do we have today? How many bowel issues do we have today? How much mental insanity do we have today? These are all serious issues. Did the enrichment process that put these 5 nutrients back in for the 44 to who knows how many that are lost by stripping away of the bran and germ, did it really take care of that? And I would say no. And the only way we can go back is to begin to mill our own so that all the bran, all the germ, all the vitamin E, all the fatty acids, and all of the fiber are there to promote our good health.
Yeah. And, when we talk about B vitamins or really any kind of nutrition, there is no substitute for the way that God formulated it and put it together, and the way that the vitamins and minerals work synergistically together to make them bioavailable to our body. Yeah. And there's no substitute for that. There's no supplement, for that. Anytime we isolate something, you're just missing the synergy of the way it's supposed to work with the body. And so I think that is an important thing to be. I know so many people are deficient in B vitamins today, and so it's always we want to look to real food when we can get that.
And there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of nervous disorder issues. And another thing, I told you, one of the first things I noticed was that I had more energy. Yes, it was the good carbohydrates, the sustaining release of these good carbohydrates for my energy, but it was also the B vitamins that are found in the grain already. But then this was something I learned a couple of years into my journey of milling my own grain. The fiber, the insoluble fiber that's not digestible for humans, it passes through our digestive system and dumps into our large intestines or our bowels, which is what helps us eliminate, this fiber. But what I learned, though, was this fiber is also the good food for our good gut organisms that should be living in our large intestines. They feed on this fiber, break it down, and actually produce, it's called gut fermentation, kind of like you ferment milk or, to make yogurt, or vegetables to make sauerkraut. But this is happening in our gut, and those organisms, a byproduct of this fermentation is a massive production of B vitamins that then get absorbed into your body through through your gut, and that helps us with energy. Every cell in our body needs these B vitamins to produce the energy for every cell. So this was a big factor. Not only those B vitamins are produced, and one Christian physiologist that I read, he said, without this gut fermentation, you could not get enough B vitamins that your body needs just from food alone. So this is a critical part too. Also, this gut fermentation, these organisms produce essential fatty acids. Butyric acid is one that they've done extensive research that they've shown that it's the energy source for the cells that line your large intestine. Also shows anti-carcinogenic properties. So it's massive what's going on there. And they produce natural antibiotics. They don't want the pathogens living in their house any more than we do. So they produce all these good antibiotics to keep the pathogenic population under control and an overgrowth of yeast and other disease-causing organisms. So it's massive. Like you say, you can't just say, oh, we lost vitamin B1 and vitamin B3. No, we lost a lot. It's huge, the essential fatty acids, but also the fiber contributes vitamins as well. And I think that's a factor that a lot of people don't realize. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's like a synergistic snowball that it's massive. One scripture that the Lord showed me, I mean, now, 32 years, I find bread scriptures everywhere in the Bible. And one that just really resonated with me in Isaiah 55, verse 2, God asked the question of the Israelites, why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for what does not satisfy? And then he goes on, hearken diligently to me and eat what is good. And that just resonated with me as, why would I spend my money on that which is not bread, and my earnings for what does not satisfy? But not only that, food that's making me sick. It may fill my belly, but it's making me sick. And that has really been kind of the cornerstone of our business and now my ministry, Real Bread Outreach, going to other countries. I don't want to give you white rice and white bread and food banks. I want to make sure we as God's people are sharing real bread with others and not food that's making them sick and that's not real. So that's kind of a scripture that just really, really, really resonated with me. And you mentioned some of the processed flour in the store. It's just, I hear people often say, I can go to Europe and I can even eat the white bread and it doesn't bother me. And I think it has to do with the chlorine derivatives that we're bleaching our flour with, the benzoyl peroxide that we're exposing our flour to, the potassium bromate. I mean, that it strengthens the gluten forming potential of the bread, but it's been shown to cause liver and thyroid issues. And yet we're putting blame on things that I don't know that that's accurate,
Absolutely. And I think this might be a good place. I anticipated that this would be a longer podcast because I had so much I wanted you to talk about. And so I think we'll make 2 parts out of this podcast and maybe close it here for part 1 and open back up because there's still so much more that I want you to comment on and talk about. We haven't even gotten to really in some of the gluten arguments and wheat belly and all that good stuff. So everybody, we're going on. You're probably mad at me.
Well, can I share?
Hearing it, and you're going to have
can
to
I share 2 scriptures to close out this section that I think would be just powerful to end on? Okay.
Yes.
First of all, Proverbs 14:12 says this: "There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death." And when the steel rolling mills and the flour, separating the bran and germ, it seemed like, yay, wonderful discovery, flour no longer spoils, but the end thereof is death. And then the other scripture that so blew me away when I found it, and it was in the most obscure place, and it was Deuteronomy 24, verse 6. I'm reading Leviticus right now. We kind of trudged through Leviticus, Deuteronomy, those scriptures, but right there, I saw this, and it's a law that God gave the Israelites about borrowing and lending. And there was something he prohibited in his law for them to take as a pledge from someone that borrowed something from them. He said, do not take a man's upper millstone as a pledge, for you would be taking his life. That's powerful. In the early 1900s, we let someone take our millstones out of our home, and we've been losing our health and our life ever since.
That's pretty powerful. Wow.
Thank you for listening today. Next week, I'll be sharing part 2 of this interview. Until next time, this is Sue Becker from Bread Beckers with Sue's Healthy Minutes.
Sue's Healthy Minutes podcast has been a presentation by the Bread Beckers Incorporated, located in Woodstock, Georgia. For more information, store hours, and learning opportunities, visit breadbeckers.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Share this with 2 friends who would benefit from this information, and be sure to join us again next week for more of Sue's Healthy Minutes.